In my job, you deal with a lot of people who suffer losses. And there are people who lose a loved one and they cannot move on. There are people who lose a loved one and turn around and say, what can I do? That's what Jennifer was doing.
So Cameron was my son. He passed away 5 years ago of a heroin overdose. I never in a million years thought that, my boy would be a heroin addict.
So like I said before, and I'll say it again, I love life. I love all of its fights.
Cameron was a student and athlete at one of the top high schools in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
He was wrestling and he broke his collarbone and he had to have surgery. So he was prescribed Percocet. He was injured about 3 months later again in a football injury and broke his other collarbone. And he didn't require surgery the second time, but they gave him more painkillers the second time. You're given 30 pills by a doctor and you think that they need to take all 30 of them because otherwise why would they give you so many? It didn't even cross my mind that it was something that was dangerous or addictive or anything like that.
It's fairly typical. Kids would get injured, whether they were in wrestling, football, gymnastics. Suddenly they're on a road and it's a fast track and it doesn't take very long.
Cameron's road to heroin addiction was paved with prescription painkillers. Eventually, he turned to cheaper and more readily available street drugs. Nearly half of people who use heroin were first addicted to prescription painkillers.
That wasn't his, goal in life, to get addicted to opiates and then move on to heroin. I didn't even know that opioids and heroin were related.
It's not that there are young people out there who are deciding one day that heroin sounds like a fun drug to try. Before they're using heroin, they're opioid addicted, and that addiction develops through prescription opioids. The pills are very expensive on the black market. They switch because it's much less expensive. We've seen overdose deaths in that group rise very rapidly because the heroin supply has become more dangerous. It has fentanyl in it now.
The migration from prescription pain pills to heroin has changed the demographics of drug addiction in America. While heroin use has increased in most socioeconomic groups, some of the greatest increases are in demographic groups with historically low rates of heroin use.
Every person I've ever talked to who ends up a heroin addict, they talk about how when they were doing pills, they would never do heroin. They would never put a needle in their arm. Crossing those thresholds into the next phase, it's literally 5 minutes. Because you go from, I've never had a needle in my arm till a needle was in my arm. And now we're off and running.
I was completely shocked. I quickly found out that, drugs don't discriminate. They're everywhere.
For an addict like Cameron, what happens is that drug replaces everything. It replaces your love for your parents. It replaces your love for your friends, your other family members. You steal, lie, cheat. Do whatever you can to get the money to get your next fix. That sounds like a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. That's what happens.
Since my son passed away, my life has completely changed. I felt like nothing was the same anymore, and nothing meant as much anymore. And so it was very difficult, and it's still very difficult. Even though it's been 5 years, it still feels like it was yesterday.
As with many parents who lose a child to opioid addiction, Jennifer has devoted her life to helping others. She started Serenity Mesa, a youth addiction recovery program.
Does anybody want a sloppy Joe?
We do long-term treatment for young men age 14 to 21, and we provide not only drug treatment and counseling, but life skills, high school education, and job placement, job readiness programs, things like that. And we're able to really dig deep into some of the trauma and some of the underlying issues that may have caused their substance abuse in the first place.
Helping others deal with addiction has helped Jennifer face her own loss.
It helps to help other people and to see, all the young men at Serenity Mesa and the progress that they make and how well they do. They're battling to save their life right now. They don't realize it because they're so young. And that was the issue, I think, with Cameron, is he was just so young. He didn't know he was dealing with a life or death situation. He just thought he could quit whenever he wanted to and everything would go back to normal. They say that you learn to live with grief. You don't get over it. It doesn't go away, but you learn to live with it. But, I still think about him all the time.
It's been said to me that these people aren't bad people trying to be good. They're sick people trying to get